All right, so we'll talk about measuring the impact of mindfulness programs. For me, talking about mindfulness programs and evaluation are like two of my favorite things. One of my other favorite things is backpacking. So here, this is me. I am a professor, work as a professor and an evaluation consultant, and I teach and run different research and evaluation programs, including mindfulness program. I'm married. I have a 17-year-old boy and a 14-year-old girl. We're going to today talk about evaluation, what evaluation is briefly, and then go into two different tools, logic model and the SIP evaluation model, how you can use those together. So those are two evaluation tools in order to ultimately develop an evaluation plan that will allow you to measure the impact of your program, of your mindfulness program or any other program. We're going to use as our example a mindfulness program. So first off, what is evaluation? Well, evaluation is the systematic collection of information about the activities, characteristics, and outcomes of programs for use by people to reduce uncertainties, improve effectiveness, and make decisions. All right. Evaluation you could think about in terms of the different sort of cognitive capacities. The Bloom's taxonomy, we think about it, knowledge is sort of the most basic, evaluation as being the sort of the highest order. And evaluation is something we all use, obviously. It's something we've used since the dawn of civilization. When we were hunter-gatherers, we had to decide, eat this mushroom or not, right? How do we evaluate? How do we make a determination of it? So informal evaluation is a part of our everyday activity. It became more formalized. We see instances of evaluations trials being done actually in the Bible, as also in the Royal Navy for the treatment of scurvy. There was a notable evaluation or a study done trying to figure out, well, what would work to address scurvy in sailors. And it turned out that citrus or limes helped reduce the vitamin deficiency associated with that. So more formalized ways of bringing evaluation to the fore have developed. In the United States, a watershed moment was in 1965 with the signing of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. We saw evaluation being funded as part of a lot of educational initiatives all across the country. And so we saw evaluations being done at all these promising projects funded by this legislation, and evaluation ultimately becoming more formalized as a profession with ultimately a national, a unified national organization, American Evaluation Association, different journals, journal articles, journals, peer-reviewed journals, and other resources and so forth. So evaluation becoming a true profession. So real quick, research and evaluation, they overlap, but they are different things. And essentially, we can think about research as the goal of research is to add knowledge to a particular discipline or field. Evaluation is really it's an effort to provide useful information to stakeholders. So it's really the lens of how you operate. Now, in evaluation, you use a lot of research methodologies. In fact, the full range are available, you'll see. But the whole sort of perspective for evaluation is how can you help the program? How can you inform the potential users of the evaluation? Whereas research is ultimately, when you're doing a study, it's like, how do you add knowledge to the discipline, to the field? So it all boils down to this. To what extent is the program working? How can the program be improved? This is what evaluation is most concerned with. So within evaluation, we have many useful tools. We're going to talk about two of those tools today that we can use and you can use to evaluate your programs, even if they're not mindfulness programs. But the example we'll use is a mindfulness program that we studied and we worked on. So logic model and the SIP evaluation model, two different approaches that we're going to use together and we'll get you started on. And they're both can be used in concert to help with program design and to help create evaluation plans. An evaluation plan is a way that you can actually, figure out, like the title of my presentation says, like, what is the impact of my mindfulness program, right? That there's an actual method that you can lay out in order to figure out the answer to that. So why evaluate? Well, really to find out what works, what doesn't work in your program, to enable fine-tuning and program improvement, to demonstrate what your program does and how it benefits participants, to add to existing knowledge about your program, and to build sustainability and expansion. Right, these are some of the reasons. Evaluation plans also are required, and logic models oftentimes are required by many different funders, like SAMHSA, a lot of Department of Education grants, the federal level, Department of Justice, many foundations. Some foundations will require developing or doing an evaluation as well. So sometimes it's a required thing. All right, that's the big picture kind of, or the primer, the overview of what evaluation is. Well, what is a logic model? Let's talk about that. Well, first, let me ask you a question. All right. Have you used the logic model to help with program design before? So you could do like maybe a hands up if you have, or yeah, okay, great. Right, you work as an evaluator. I remember seeing that from your bio, so that makes sense. All right. So we'll talk about real quick what a logic model is. A logic model is basically a visual representation of how programs' inputs, activities, and intended outcomes are interconnected and related to each other. And essentially, you have inputs, activities, outputs, and outcomes, right? Yogi Berra has a great quote. You got to be careful if you don't know where you're going, because you might not get there. I just have to think about that for a few moments. But another great quote by him. Really, what we're trying to do here is we're trying to provide guidance, develop a model to provide guidance where we want to go for the program. We'll know when we actually we'll know we'll know how to get there, and we'll know when we arrive. So all those kind of things we're trying to lay out and make super clear. Logic models help with brainstorming, program design, with assisting in gaining clarity about what you want to do as a program, assist in preparation, organization. And it can be challenging to communicate to others in an organization without writing sort of a long, lengthy document what a program is, what it isn't, and how it achieves its goals. And the logic model is really just like a one-page visual description of that. So it's kind of a handy tool that you can use in the nonprofit world, in the for-profit world, for organizations, all sorts of contexts. I think it can be quite helpful. It helps to facilitate effective communication about a project. It helps to identify appropriate funding sources. It prevents over-promising and overly broad goals, and it can help with, program evaluation. So we can think about logic model as a series of if-then relationships, right? So if we have a particular problem, then we can devote certain inputs, resources, to run certain activities that will result in specific outputs and yield certain outcomes. And the outcomes are the sort of the reason why we want to run the program. If it's recidivism in kids, or if it's burnout in our employees, whatever it is, we want to move the needle on that. And so we have all these kind of steps in order to affect that change. And sometimes within outcomes, there's short, intermediate, long-term outcomes that have also kind of an if-then relationship to them. All right. Typically, there should be some sort of theory of change or a reason why activities should influence outcomes. When you're developing your logic model, you want to be sure that it makes sense. It might seem obvious, but that's sort of missed many times, that it should make sense that the activities that you're proposing will result in the outcomes changing. So we shouldn't be in this sort of thing where you have different activities listed, different outcomes listed, and sort of it's kind of not really clear why there should be this change. And even better yet, what Dwight Schrute here has to say. So there could be better guidance of what to do, and really it's theory. Theory, nothing as practical as good theory, is what Carol Weiss said. It helps to concentrate evaluation, attention, and resources on key aspects of the program. It asks program practitioners to make their assumptions explicit and to reach consensus with their colleagues about what they're trying to do and why. So it can help strengthen the program. All right. So the logic model components. I'll show you an example, our mindfulness program just shortly, but again, inputs, activities, outputs, and outcomes. So inputs are the resources, the activities are what you're going to do with those resources, the outputs are the direct product of the activities, so what happens immediately when you do those activities, and then the outcomes are like the so what, the benefits from the program. And you can see we use this sort of iconography to represent each of these symbols. So back up here, you'll see throughout the presentation, we use the similar icons here. Many times with developing a logic model, it's helpful to lay out the outcomes that you'd like to target, given like the specific needs or the challenges in your target population. What are the things that you'd like to move the needle on? And then you can kind of work backwards from right to left and think about, well, let's articulate what the activities might be, what the outputs of those activities would be. And then finally, what would the resources that we'd need, the inputs in order to make this happen? And all of this should be guided by, again, by a theory of change or different theories of change. So the program that we ran was a mindfulness program, the stress reduction through attention training program at Nova Southeastern University. We ran it because the mental health crisis, it really was happening before COVID-19. And COVID-19, we worried, and we saw it in our students and students nationally, that symptoms, psychosocial symptoms, anxiety, depression, substance abuse, we worried that it would go up, and it did go up. And when we first started to run the program, our students moved to online only. They, remember the beginning of the pandemic, it was very stressful, especially for students, for many folks, obviously, but for students, it was also considered to be a stressful experience. And we had a lot of issues around academics. We had a lot of issues around taking courses, around kind of where they could live and all those sorts of things. So we didn't know, though, if a web-based mindfulness intervention using texting would be feasible or effective. And that's the intervention ultimately that we came together and figured out, okay, and Mark we used mindful text for this intervention. We developed an intervention in order to address kind of these problems, and yet we didn't really know if what we came up with, if that would have the effect that we wanted. Bringing a mindfulness-based approach online, also doing it in the exact format that we did it, we didn't know sort of what we might see. So the program that we developed, the SRAT for short, just real quick, so you can understand the logic model. It provides different weekly exercises going over focused attention, open monitoring of attention, loving kindness, meditation. Some of the exercises use mindful text, the text messaging application related to mindfulness practice that was provided each day to support the individual's practice. The participants got these texts on a regular basis every day in order to remind them to what their practice is, to support their practice, and also to get some as well. The course was held synchronously weekly for 6 weeks, and we ran many different cohorts. This is an example of a logic model kind of depicting the program that I mentioned. And you can see here, it's like a kind of a simple way to share what a program is and what it isn't. We have here the inputs, anywhere from like the technology resources and the faculty and the money that we needed and so forth to make it run, the different faculty that were involved with this and others as well, including Mark was on the team and Gus Castellanos, who was one of our adjunct faculty, but he presented at the conference there, the Futures Mindful Conference. Anyway, so we have these different activities. We have marketing of the program, we have the actual sessions, we have mindful text, we have the daily mindfulness practices, and then our research and evaluation efforts. And ultimately what we wanted to see, and you can kind of, we'll go back through this in just a little bit, but we wanted to see an improvement in perceived stress, in COVID-related distress, in mind wandering, sustained attention, really to just move the needle on students staying in school and in the program, not dropping out, having a better well-being, improved psychosocial functioning, and better coping strategies. Also, as part of the effort, we wanted to develop an evidence base so that we could make decisions about doing this kind of programming at the university in the future. All right, so we see this these are sort of arrows. Hard to see the arrowhead. The arrowheads are super tiny. I have to fix that. But normally we have sort of arrows depicting the relationship between the outputs and activities and the outcomes. That's what we have going on there. So this is a kind of a simple representation. Usually a logic model like this, it looks simple. It looks like it could be developed in just a few minutes, but it's deceptively simple. Usually takes quite a bit of time. This one took several hours, a lot of different collaboration and meetings in order to develop this, But the idea is you can see here very simply put them like what the program consists of, and you can share this with different stakeholders. You can share this with your boss if you have a program you want to run. If you're trying to get funding from a foundation or another organization, take an existing program and go to other branches, other facilities, part of your organization. You can use this to share that in a kind of in a way that can be more accessible than a narrative, although they can be used in complementary form. Okay, so that gives you a sense of that. So let's go through each of those elements, like what are they, and we'll kind of do this quick because we have a ton to go over here. All right. So like I said before, just anyone just joining right now, we have the session's being recorded. So if you missed any part of it, you can rewind and you'll be able to watch it. So I just wanted to say that. So outcomes in the logic model, those are the benefits or the results. Those are the so what, the point of the program, the difference your program makes for the people, for the community, or for the environment, right? That's, those are kind of like the basic, like fundamental kind of things that we're trying to shift to move the needle on. Examples of outcomes are, let's say you can break them down to short, intermediate, long term. You have on the short term side, you can think about awareness, knowledge, attitudes. Intermediate, more like the practice, behavior, and then long term might be like human, like conditions, environmental condition, economic or civic condition. So we can kind of break it down like that, and many times we'll do that. But these are essentially the results for individuals, communities, businesses, environment. Outputs. So outputs sometimes are confused with outcomes, but they're the direct product of program activities. They are the size and scope of the services or products delivered by or produced by the program. It's like the stuff that's done when you do an activity. It's what you see happen right away. It's like the number of classes taught, meetings held, people participating, their level of satisfaction with what they're receiving in that moment, number of hours, that kind of thing. Those are the outputs. Outputs and outcomes, again, so just to contrast them, Jim Collins in Good to Great, like is known by a lot of people in the business world, is a social sector's compendium to supplement to Good to Great. And he uses the term outputs for outcomes and for outputs, which I think a lot of what he has is phenomenal. But I think that part I think that nuance is important. It's important to distinguish. The outputs, really what happens immediately when you conduct the activities. The outputs are the more distal effects of those activities, really the reason for running the program, right? So for our program, it was the number of students served. It was a number and length of sessions. It was the and then outcomes were the level of stress or improving stress and so forth. That was like the point of the program, one of the points of the program. So activities are the processes, the techniques, the tools, the events, the technology, the action of the planned program, right? So there, the products would be the promotional material, the curriculum, the treatment manual. The services would be the education and training, perhaps as an example, psychotherapy, medication management, health screening. Infrastructure could be developing a structure, relationships, capacity, all these sorts of things, all right? These are examples of activities. And finally, inputs would be the resources that you bring to bear in a project. So it might be the staff, the time, the materials, equipment, the location, the volunteers, money, and so forth. So these are all the sort of the inputs that we would bring into a particular program. So the benefits of a logic model are brainstorming program design, communication, collaboration, helping with funding, search, and selection. These are all things that help with logic models. Okay, so now I said, so different tools that we're gonna kind of merge together with the logic model and the SIP evaluation model. So let's talk about the SIP evaluation model. But first off, have you all had any, have you used any evaluation models or frameworks or heard of any? Not sure. You can put in the chat if you have any. So I mean, we all use, many of us have used just basic, like if we run a training, or like, what I'm doing right now, we'll ask like a basic, a satisfaction questionnaire at the end or something like that. But there's actual like frameworks or models that you can use in order to help you, figure out the impact of your wellness program, your mindfulness program, right? And one of those is the SIP evaluation model. And then within evaluation, we have many different evaluation models. The SIP one was developed first by Dan Stufflebeam, and you can see here within evaluation, this is called the tree of evaluation. We have these sort of general branches, but there's many different ones to choose from. I like this one as a way to kind of introduce evaluation. Dan Stufflebeam and Gili Zhang wrote this book more recently. Dr. Stufflebeam passed away in the last few years, but developed this approach that I think is quite helpful and can get us all started, even without being an evaluator, without knowing much about evaluation. So the SIP model, it stands for Context, Input, Process, Product, right? So it's a systems model applied to evaluation. It has the steps or stages of an evaluation in a comprehensive way, listed them out. And then the fact is, you don't have to use all the elements. You could just use some of the elements depending on what you're interested in. Right. And so it helps you frame the challenge, the questions, the problem that you're trying to address in a helpful way. As John Dewey says here, a problem well put is half solved. And I think the SIP model and a lot of good evaluation models will help you to do that. So the SIP, so first aspect of the SIP model is the context step, right? Context evaluation. Well, what is a context evaluation? What would that be? That's looking at the context of a program, figuring out, what maybe conducting a needs assessment or goal assessment to figure out what the basic needs are of the participants of the program, what the objectives should be, figuring out what the objectives of the program should be, determining whether the proposed objectives will be sufficiently responsive to the identified needs. That's a context evaluation. So figuring out kind of, what is the lay of the land. So for us, it's like, what were the needs of the students who, we were experiencing kind of a lot of stress, a lot of challenges at the beginning, especially at the beginning or the first kind of phases of the pandemic. So that's what we were concerned with. That's something we could have looked at more. That's a context evaluation. Input evaluation refers to description of the program inputs and the resources. And it's a comparison, essentially, it's an evaluation of how the program might perform compared to other programs, and evaluation of the proposed design of the program, looking at the literature out there to figure out, okay, what should the program look like? And that's what we did. We looked at that to some degree. We did a lit review and so forth, and we spoke with the different experts on our team and really kind of figured out, okay, what should the program actually look like to address the needs of the participants? So SIP, CIPP, right? So process is the first piece. So that's examining how a program is being implemented, monitoring how the program is actually performing. So looking at that, identifying defects or strengths in the procedural design or the implementation of the program. These are all sort of aspects of process evaluation. Answering the question, like, is the program being implemented as it should? So sometimes with your evaluation, you're more interested in that. Like at the beginning stages, you just want to know, can this be done? Can it be implemented in a way that's consistent with how we've planned, right? Is this feasible? So we're more concerned with that. And then sort of the outcomes maybe are secondary, or they're let's say, mutually important. Finally, product evaluation. So that's measuring anticipated outcomes, benefit cost assessment. These are all aspects of product evaluation, sustainability, expansion and transportability, moving a program across to other centers, other locations, and so forth. These are all important aspects of product evaluation. All right. Any questions so far? So we have these different elements, and you can think about them as occurring sequentially, but they really don't have to be. They can occur in sort of any any order. You can do a context and a product evaluation. You could do, just any number of these, or just focus on one. They can, if you're coming in at the beginning of a project, you might want to first figure out and really spend time figuring out the needs of the target population, then focus on the design of the program, implement the program, figure out, is it being implemented as it should be, and then what are the impacts or the outcomes of the program. But sometimes you can go in different orders or emphasize different aspects to this. All right. I'll assume you'll type, if you want, you can type in the chat if there's any questions or any comments on this. All right. So how can you use these two together? So this is where we kind of really get into it here, using the logic model and the SIP model together to develop an evaluation plan, which you could use then to figure out what the impact of your mindfulness program is ultimately. Right, so here is our program again. You recognize the logic model. We looked at this before. We could think about, so the logic model, and we think about the SIP model together, right? Context evaluation is looking at really the problem, the organization, what are the challenges individuals are focusing on. So that's not necessarily as well represented in a logic model. There's sometimes people will put that in, they'll put sort of like a needs kind of statement or some sort of context statement. But we typically don't have that in a standard logic model, if there is such a thing as a standard logic model. Input evaluation is focused on the resources, so figuring out what the resources should be, what would need to be, and what the activities would be, right? So the design of the program. The process evaluation looks at how are the activities being implemented and what's happening. So when you're implementing activities, you have the outputs that occur, right? When you run mindfulness sessions, what does that mean? That means, well, we had 6 different cohorts of 25 students each. It was actually ended up being a little bit less than that, depending on the cohort. But we have students and faculty showing up. We have 6 weekly Zoom sessions, 1 hour each. We have sessions that cover a topic, discussion, practice, and inquiry. And we also have a participant satisfaction, right? So we have all these sort of different things, right? And so this is what we'd be evaluating. And then on the product evaluation, the last P here, it would be focusing on outcomes. And really, that's what we did. We focused more as more of a product evaluation, or we really set this up more as a research study that had evaluation components as well. All right. So how do you use these together to develop an evaluation plan? All right. So first off, you'd want to think about context input, the SIP model, from a formative and a summative evaluation perspective. Well, what does that mean? Formative evaluation supports program improvement, and the emphasis is on forming, right? Formative, forming, shaping, improving, thus the term formative, right? So some questions in evaluation, we use evaluation questions, it's like in research, you use research questions, would be, for example, how can the outcomes be enhanced? This is like as you're running the program, how can the quality of implementation be improved, right? These are examples of formative evaluation, right? And formative evaluation questions. Summative evaluation refers to judging the overall merit, worth, and significance of a project. The term summative connotes a summit or summing up judgment. Both of those are quotes from Michael Quinn Patton, by the way. So, for example, to what extent were the targeted outcomes? What was the cost effectiveness of the program? These are examples of summative questions that you would ask for, like at the end when the program is done, or when the program's been implemented to some significant benchmark. We're looking to see, what was the value of this program, making a judgment about that, right? So you think about the SIP model from those two perspectives, then that can guide you with respect to how you formulate the evaluation questions and the data that you'll need to get in order to answer those questions, how you collect the data, how you analyze the data, interpret the findings, apply those findings, and report on those, all different, very important aspects. So first off, the evaluation question. Well, great quote by Rumi, look for the answer inside your question. This is a picture we took at Yellowstone National Park from the top of El Capitan maybe 5 years ago or something. So context evaluation questions. All right, so here's some examples, all right, for our program. So a formative context evaluation question, and again, it's key to have well-formulated questions that helps sort of guide everything else, just like the Rumi quote. What are the needs of NSU students? That would be a formative question. A summative question would be, to what extent did the program address the high priority needs of NSU students, right? So that's one is sort of like during implementation, one is when it's done, right? Input evaluation questions. So formative, how can the SRAT, our program, be best designed, staffed, and implemented? What would that look like? Summative was, how well were the selected approaches developed into a sound and viable plan, right? So how well did the actual program design do? That's what we're trying to say there. Process evaluation questions from the formative and from the summative perspective. So what are the impediments to project implementation that need to be addressed? And then how well, that's formative side. Summative, how well were implementation challenges overcome, right? So we can think about that. And then lastly, product evaluation. So formative, what positive or negative side effects are emerging? This is in real time, like as a program is being implemented. And then summative, to what extent did the program successfully address the stated outcomes? So like when the program's done, what kind of outcomes did we achieve? And looking at our work, I'm not going to go through each examples of each one, but looking at it from our perspective in our study, when you're thinking about it from your study, like which type of evaluation you want to look at, you want to think about, the specific type of evaluation question. Is it product summative, product, formative? And you can have many different types depending on what you're interested in. We were most interested in product summative evaluation question, which is indicated here. To what extent did the program successfully address the stated outcomes? And to do that and to measure what we showed in our logic model, like these are the measures that we actually implemented, we used, right? We used the short item 5-factor mindfulness questionnaire. Many of you are probably familiar with that, the Dundee stress state questionnaire, thought control, cognitive failures questionnaire, perceived stress scale, COVID-19 stress items, and a sustained attention to response test. These all matched up with specific outcomes that we had listed on our logic model. These are just different surveys that we used, that we administered in a pre-post way. And also we used mindful text in order to send messages where we requested a reply to collect different data points. So we had pre-post testing, and we used also a comparison group as well. We had an implementation group, a treatment group, and also a comparison group that didn't receive any intervention at all, just so how we could see how they reacted to the measures that we used, so we could compare that. For our data analysis, we used descriptive statistics and also linear mixed model analysis, which is just an inferential statistical approach to determine if there were significant gains over time between groups. And ultimately, we're looking to see, did we obtain improvements in scores from pre to post tests in comparison to the control group? So that's one of the main things we were looking at, right? So those different measures, those data points, when we lay out on our logic model what the outcomes are, we can identify data points for these. And what we focused on these, like the short term, we didn't really look at the long term very much. That's something for future study. We focused more on short-term outcomes. We also asked about participant satisfaction, which we think about as an output, because it's not the reason for running a program. It's more, it's a means to an end. You want people to like your program. So yeah, participant satisfaction, something we had a questionnaire that we gave at the end of the program to get insight into that. So the logic model, laying out all the different elements, you can decide what you want to measure, and you can come up with instruments that will be appropriate for your program in order to then share your findings with other stakeholders, other people who are involved in your organization, who might make decisions about running the program, disseminating the program, funding the program, and all that good stuff. All right. So as the famous management guru Peter Drucker said, what gets measured gets managed. So, we want to measure these things, like I said, and there's many different ways you can measure the different areas that are identified of your program that are identified in your logic model. You can use surveys, achievement and other tests, site observations. You can use stakeholder interviews, focus groups, case studies, organizational administrative data, program materials and manuals, public databases, feedback workshops, all these sort of things in order to collect data to determine impact. So trying to teach martial arts through katas is like trying to teach swimming on dry land. So at the end of the day, what I mean here is that in order to learn how to do this stuff, well, you have to do this stuff, right? So to actually create a logic model, just taking a program that you're running and working on developing it and going through that process again and again, you get better and better at it and develop more useful logic models. And I can certainly help with that, and other evaluation colleagues can as well. And then also designing evaluations and addressing the evaluation questions, creating evaluation questions. These are all things that take some time to get good at, but certainly you can get started. With different resources wanted to share with you. There's a logic model template I can share with you all. There's a great resource on logic models by the Kellogg Foundation. Here's a link. I think they just recently changed the link, so you can actually just Google it and it'll come up. Great logic model development guide. This is also available on the Western Michigan site, a checklist for the SIP evaluation model. This is what it kind of looks like, the cover page, but these are all free resources. It's an example of the checklist would provide specific ideas around doing process evaluation. It's quite lengthy and it goes into all the different areas of the SIP model. I have this interview with Dr. Zhang about the SIP model, so you can watch that as well. And I think lastly here, we have these evaluation flashcards that Michael Quinn Patton developed. It's a great resource to learn more about evaluation. Well, thanks. I'll stop recording in case people have other questions that you don't want to ask on camera or have it recorded. So I'll do that.